One of the things that really gets to me about the Republican Party is the hypocrisy. It's just talking about being the party of the government and freedom and democracy, but then promoting authoritarianism and trying to overturn elections. Talking about letting local entities decide, but then mandating vaccine mandates. The list goes on and on. So I guess one of the areas where I think the hypocrisy is the most is when the Republican Party talks about being the party of life, with abortion. And so I guess my question for you is, how can a party that claims to be the party of life be the party of life when they are opposing background checks that 90% of them and gun safety rules that 90% of the country supports that would keep kids from getting killed at school? How can they be a party of life when they're trying to take away kids' health care? How can they be a party of life when they support abortion, or oppose abortion, but support the death penalty, putting more people to life? How can they be the party of life when they talk about life, but they encourage people to be reckless with COVID and endanger those around them? I'd love to get your thoughts on that, because it's really a sore point for me.
Yeah, you covered a lot of topics there, but I think generally speaking, let's go through them. So on the issue of pro-life and abortion, versus the death penalty, you're talking about an innocent baby versus a hardened, violent criminal who's a danger to society.
Is a life.
And I just think there's a huge. But the Bible said there is justice, and that in some cases, justice requires, just to protect other people. In some cases, these criminals are so heinous that if you allow them to live, they could potentially destroy other lives. So that's, I think, but again, in these prisons, these criminals are actually a risk to the life of the guards and to the other prisoners. We've seen it. We have the evidence. This is not a hypothetical. There's that. And then on the issue of background checks, I think there are lots of Republicans who support common sense, and they do, background checks and gun control laws. The problem for a lot of people is that the vast majority of gun violence in this country is perpetrated by illegally obtained weapons. And so the laws on the books are more than sufficient in most cases to have prevented most of the gun violence. The sexy headlines that happen, where we hear about the gun victims, that's only a small, tiny fraction of actual gun crimes in this country. And where do those gun crimes actually occur? Liberal Democrat areas. So until Democrats get their houses in order to stop illegal handguns, for example, I just think they lose moral credibility. And then on the issue of children's health care, so Medicaid, there was a gold standard study, basically a lottery system where everybody else was the same. And the only factor was if they got Medicaid or not. And they looked, this happened in Oregon. And they found that there was actually zero impact on the health of someone if they had Medicaid or didn't, because Medicaid is such a terrible reimbursement that people who have Medicaid behave as if they don't even have health insurance, because most outpatient and normal doctors, family doctors, they don't accept Medicaid. You'd have to go through so a lot of them end up just going to the ER as it is, and it doesn't end up saving money in the long run. They also don't do preventive health care. So we have to fundamentally change how Medicaid works. And I think that includes making it more private sector competition driven, the way Medicare Part D is. And then it would make it a lot more valuable for children.
And what about the recklessness over COVID? My first point, where people are putting themselves, I know we don't like to talk about the former president on the show, but he tested positive for COVID and then exposed himself to hundreds of people, and then had the audacity. He said, "Oh, maybe it was some gold star parent that gave it to me." I mean, this is the kind of thing that people say, "Wow, how can this be a party that's concerned about life and the health of other people?"
Well, President Trump moved heaven and earth to get the COVID vaccine, and he did something that I don't think any other previous president would have been able to do on the timeline. No, it is. If you're talking about lives saved, and not to mention, the states that have had the worst outcomes are states like New York, where President Trump sent the ship Comfort, and Cuomo could have moved those nursing home patients into the ship that the president provided, but that chip was almost not used at all. And you know why? Because Cuomo got $1 million from the hospital association to his campaign for reelection. So he basically was a pay to play because he then increased their reimbursement a little bit. And so they basically had him under their control. So I think there is, you're right that hypocrisy is the universal sin in politics. I totally agree with you on that front. But I just think that the liberal media does such a very efficient job at, bringing balance to lots of these questions that we're talking about today.
Well, I'll give a quick response. As far as the abortion and death penalty goes, I think that you can't pick and choose which lives to save. Either a life is a life or it isn't. I mean, I can make that argument. Well, there are a lot of people who you can pick and choose and say, well, there are circumstances, but either you support life or you don't. So I do think it's hypocritical to be against abortion and support the death penalty. As far as healthcare goes, yes, that's true. But if you look at states where Medicaid has been banned, and again, it's one thing if they said, you know what, we don't want to bring in Medicaid, but let's bring in something else. But no, I mean, there hasn't been any alternative. And in states like Missouri, the voters voted to have Medicaid and the legislature just disregarded it without even coming up with something else. So outcomes for children are worse in those states. I mean, as Casey Stengel said, you can look it up. And as far as, if we get to the other health issues like COVID, if you look at, yes, Cuomo was a disaster. He handled it very poorly. But he was praised by the media. He got a love fest. Everybody slobbered all over him. No defender of Andrew Cuomo. I think he was, a dreadful man, a nasty person, and he got what came to him. I'm just sorry that over 10,000 seniors in New York had to die. But that was in the early stages of the pandemic. What you're talking about. If you look at the rates in blue states versus red states, they're actually better. And I do think, again, I think you should have no mandates. I think every school should be just able to decide what's best for them. I think every small business should be allowed to decide what's best for them. I have a small business, and we made a decision that we were not going to, because of being a spa, we're not mandated by San Francisco, which is as liberal as they come, to not require people to be vaccinated. We test them at the door for temperature. We make sure they wear masks, and we haven't had one case of COVID with staff or with clients at SenSpa. And I'm very, very proud of that. But that's a decision we should make, and that's a decision that we have the right to make. And I think every business should have the right to make it. But for some bureaucrat 300 miles away to tell you for pure political points that you can't require vaccinations, particularly if you're like a cruise line in Florida, it's just insane.
I agree with you there. More freedom around the board.
Yeah. So, well, God, another great show. Always enjoy the conversation, always pragmatic, always respectful. I guess it's a little sunny where I am. You're probably seeing more of my face than you care to, folks. But in any case, thank you, Carrie. And we will see you next week on another episode of Practically Political.